Hello and welcome to Behind the DM Screen. My name is Ted and I have over 19 years of Dungeon Master experience. I am the DM for Inverness, The Great Beyond, that is ran live on Twitch every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These videos describe what I was thinking during key scenes during the session and how I reacted as a DM. This gives not only players, but DMs that are trying to learn new tactics and tricks to go ahead and consider and think about as they watch this. We are going to start at around 4:30. So the Shuva boss, this is called the Shosuva, if you want to look it up. Shoosuva. It's just a gigantic Shosuva with better than average stats, but the same AC. Jabu immediately attempts to cast slow on the big boss, but this was somewhat planned as Jabu has some powerful spells up his sleeve. Luckily, I crit succeeded, but honestly, I award powerful effects and spells like this. The players at the time had no idea a second, much stronger boss existed, so I wanted them to feel powerful here, but there was no way for me to fudge this. He got wrecked. The spell just didn't happen, unfortunately for him. So we're going to shift to 654, and the creature powers up. I wanted to make sure that the players had a premonition of sorts as to what to prepare for. So I gave this monster one of the effects that the next boss had. Anyone who notices the effect sees that the attacks now have a +2. And I spread the damage around as I had the boss fight, because again, even though we're in a situation where this is a mini boss, I don't want any players to die here. I want the players to ultimately fight this boss, feel strong, feel like they've really done well, they've stopped him, and just destroy him. Now, the fight goes pretty swimmingly. Jabu, spoiler, gets his slow off, and they do enough damage to proceed. Slow is tremendously powerful. It allows you to make a monster only be able to attack once, no matter if it can attack multiple times or not. So it's just very, very strong. I was happy that he went ahead and got that done. So there's something that happened here that was very important, and as a DM, you really have to be flexible, and I'll show you what I did. We go over to 30-30 because they did a lot of role playing in between, and you'll notice if you were watching the stream that I actually make a couple clones of the boss. Now, I realized that the fight seemed to go tremendously too easy with the Shosuva, and there was no fixing it. You don't want to cheese a fight. If you feel like it's going to be too easy, let it happen. Shift over to the next boss or make a new boss and do what you need to do to go ahead and pan it out. So, time for plan B. I made 3 copies of the boss. So the logic was to do that. We made him be subject to the mirror image spell. Look up the mirror image spell. It is amazing. It allows the mirror images to soak up damage, basically take a full hit, and it's going to make it a much more difficult of a fight. The players themselves are fighting the Monastery of the Distressed Body Grandmaster. The monster itself, his name is Wrath. They recently found out that the 7 sins have been made essentially demigods to guard sacred weapons, armor, and tools from the Great War 1,000 years ago. Wrath is here, and the demon couldn't get the weapon since the sins are immune to all damage caused by fiends and demons. The players are tricked to go find the blade and bring it back, with the demon knowing full well regular people cannot kill him. However, the sins may be killed by a weapon crafted by the gods, and Thorka has a blade made by Thor himself. Pretty crazy plot twist. Now, the Grandmaster has shards of a Vorpal sword for claws and can kill someone instantly with a natural 20. He is pretty brutal, but this party's been preparing for a fight, and I'm going to give it to them. So from there, we go over to 3455. See if we can do this right. That's close enough. So I didn't want the players to make a decision to leave the dungeon, long rest, and then come back. so I felt it was appropriate to set up the magical fire as a plot device to force the players to move farther. To me, short rests are fine, but long rests are not, because at that point it's so cheesy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want the players to be in a situation where it's such a tremendously cheesy situation like that. So they do an Arcana check on the fire, and I explained that the fire itself isn't consuming the wooden pillars, because in this dungeon, the wooden pillars can be destroyed and cause a cave-in, and they're everywhere. But the fire burns nice and hot on the players. This was the DM, myself, assuring them that this is not a punishment and it's not going to kill them, but they need to find a way to move forward instead of attempting to go through the fire. The players look inside the crates of the chests and they find some soul coins, which will be used later at the Wandering Emporium, and they go through the process that way. It is a very good role play and allows them to move forward without any real hitch. So from there, they shift over. I'm going to shift over to 49. This is when the players are first introduced to the sins from a tapestry, and they see the sword. The sins, there's the 7 deadly sins, and again, they guard crazy items. The sword is being guarded by Wrath, however, he doesn't appear until they get closer to the sword itself. So, when a player gets closer to the sword, we do a couple things. So, Jabu moves closer to the sword. Right there.
Ooh, look at that.
As soon as you step there. So from there, the players know that something's happening. We move all the tokens into the lair so they can see them. They are freaked out because they didn't realize there's going to be 3 bosses here from what they think. And then the music changes, and the players realize that they're now the prey. I start to roleplay as Wrath, and they get 3 warnings until the fight starts. This is a way to allow the players to kind of prepare. If they wanted to cast any defensive spells, if they wanted to drink any potions, they could do that while all this was happening. Pushing Jabu back was my first warning. So Jabu gets pushed back after he says something. The second warning is when Jabu says he wants the sword again. And then finally, Wrath talks about the mini-boss, who winds up being his pet. The monster powers up, and are really worried. They see this power up, which is the same as what the monster previous had, so they're already familiar with it. And then he asks several times, "Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here?" And I keep role playing just to build up the fight and really, really panic them. Finally, Jabu tries to reach for the sword, and I made it so that the weapons, armor, and anything else is ethereal until those bosses are defeated. I felt that this would be a good way of protecting an item like this, essentially attaching it to the god itself. The boss music starts, and then we start initiative. Pretty crazy stuff.
Who's that? Yeah, I was gonna say who's that?
So instead of doing legendary actions for damaging things or spells, because he's so powerful, I felt it appropriate to taunt the players with them. So this added a bit more depth and eventually allowed the players to reply back with the taunting. Some people in my chat started to spoon feed me some one-liners, and I got into it fairly well too. It was a lot of fun. I I will say that if you didn't watch the main event, please consider at least watching from 111 on. The fight was very, very, very good. From there, the players, as it says on the monster itself, if the players are observant enough, they notice that the vorpal bladed claws and what they do and how they can kill him, or kill the players rather. Um, I wanted them to really understand how much danger they were in, because the monster itself wasn't dealing a lot of damage, and it seemed like the monster was taking a lot of damage but not really doing a lot. So eventually, when the claw attacked Tarek, I allowed Tarek to roll an Arcana check so that he can go ahead and share kind of the news. And then I typed it out and whispered it to him, the description, so he could tell the party. And then eventually it was unveiled a few minutes later. And they were pretty spooked at that point. They really weren't sure what was going to happen. So at 127.30, the monster powers up again. So now he has a +2 to his attack rolls, a +2 to his AC. We're using one-liners galore to really panic the players. And the players know they're hurting it, but they don't know how long it's going to take until really somebody dies. Now the blood will be spilt. It's going to be max damage once again. So eventually, 12 points of slashing damage. Something major happens.
I don't care about you.
Beacon, who controls his sidekick Dagod, doesn't understand how serious it is for me to roll natural 20 on the claw attack. And then I roleplay the scene to make him understand how devastating the attack is. Suddenly, all of you see the slash of its claw. Suddenly understanding what Tarek was talking about. The claw itself. And Degas still standing there, not really knowing what happened. Suddenly, you realize what happened, and Degas' face brightens and then becomes solemn as his head falls to the ground. He falls to his knees and falls backwards.
What?
So he didn't understand how devastating the attack was going to be. Degas falls on the floor. The morale of the group drops dramatically as someone is automatically slain with his head hitting on the floor. Afterwards, I show Tarek the power of his periapta poison and really put the scare into everybody. With one person dead, Tarek, who could have been slain with the tail hit, everyone shifts into high gear in order to kill him as soon as possible. So Tarek takes 15 piercing damage here, but then I show him that he also would have taken basically a fireball's worth of damage, 23 poison. And he explains later that, holy crap, I 100% would have died there. There wouldn't have been anything else I could have done about it. From there, he is going to go. So at 143.55, I have him go and set up his aura to be black. This is purely aesthetic. To let the players get nervous that there's even more, but honestly, there isn't. The players really don't need to know that, but it makes them feel like they're getting closer to the end itself, and I change his aura based on his HP values. At this point, I roll a 19 on Thorka. I remind him how close he is to death. The Constitution saving throw he makes here is so paramount for the poison itself, because I do hit him with the poison. And if he doesn't pass that poison check, the fight gets incredibly worse for him. Because if you're not familiar with how poison works in D&D, you have to roll disadvantage, and they don't have any way to go ahead and deal with that. So he potentially could have failed that and would have had to roll disadvantage on everything. But luckily, spoiler alert, he passes. So the players are on the ropes now. Jabu pulls out haste and says, you know what? I'm just going to cast haste on Thorka. And this is, think of this like Colossus throwing Wolverine, if you're familiar with the X-Men. Casting haste on someone who can do something like that makes it so that if they have multi-attack, they can use multi-attack twice. So he's now going to get, Thorka's going to get 4 attacks against the enemy. And it's tremendously powerful. Thorka realizes after talking to Jabu a couple times, a little bit out of game, that this is really going to be the final blow. He needs to make the attacks count. He needs to do as much as he can. And then he makes his attacks. So important for him to go ahead and just get good rolls here. This is the critical point, because if something didn't happen right, this was it. And he makes his attacks. He crits with one of the attacks, and he hits with every other attack, dealing 108 damage to him. Thorka has a special ability on his sword that if he rolls a natural 20 on an enemy under 100 HP, he can tear a life force out of an enemy's body. We go through the kill and they feel tremendously happy that he dies, and Wrath gives his death speech, and that is the end of that boss. From there, I whisper to Thorka because of Daga being dead that they could try a new item Tignum made for them. It was a special tool that has a chance of destroying his body or reviving him with a 50% success rate. It works once a day. At this point, I was contemplating it not working at all because of his head being off, but I was also wrestling with the idea that if this happened someplace else, I didn't want to eliminate the opportunity as well being done someplace else, so I allowed it. Is that the right choice? I think so. There's always a chance to kill somebody permanently in this game, and it just is what it is, how it works.
And
So
he says the command word, and he just
so
touches
155.27.
and just he basically goes, you know, fuck it, life's a roll of the dice anyway, and he activates the device.
All right, roll a percentile die. So with the 50% chance of success, Tarek tries it, and when he rolls the dice, he gets a 62% and it passes. I go through the full description and Daga lives again. The rule is that he revives at 1 HP and 1 point of exhaustion. They go through their kind-hearted gestures and move on. The sword is there after Daga kind of gets up, and finally Beacon picks it up. The sword is the sword of Zerial, if you're curious of finding it in D&D Beyond, with some very minor changes. Players don't know the changes yet. Pretty cool stuff. So the players take some time going ahead and getting out of the dungeon here. It almost like they wanted to explore more. So at 2:20, I went ahead and had them they saw this kind of like red glob slime thing to chase them. And I had to chase them to really get them out of the dungeon as soon as possible because I wanted the players to not spend a lot more time in here. There was nothing that they missed, but I felt the need for them to feel that their lives are still in danger. In a sense, getting them back to the tavern and shifting them into the next scene, I felt that this was the best way to do that. So that's what we did. Really simple.
It being sensed.
Finally, when they get back to the tavern, the players are talking about how to hide the sword from the demon itself. What they don't realize is that the demon gave Beacon's soul because Beacon gave his soul
Well, I don't
to this demon to find out about the sword inadvertently to save someone else's life. So the demon, the woman next to Mahadi, winds up giving Mahadi Beacon's soul. And Mahadi runs the Wandering Emporium already for a long, and he gives her a very long stay at the inn there as payment. She leaves while she watches them, and Mahadi gives him a chance to trade the weapon to help gaining a way to fix Thorka's curse, as well as giving Beacon's soul back. After some debating and role-playing with the players decide that they need really more time to think about it, and Mahadi has been attempting to gain the players' trust online through the roleplay between sessions. Believe it or not, during this session and between sessions, there's a Discord group that the players can actually roleplay and type out responses as they play. As they eat Mahadi's food while they talk to him, they realize it doesn't taste disgusting like other food they've experienced from Damnation already. So it's kind of like to give them that hint that if they decide to stay with Mahadi, they will actually eat food that doesn't taste disgusting. For those unaware, in Hell, just like in the Inverness campaign, all the food tastes disgusting regardless of the food, although the food retains its nutritional value. So finally they talk for a long time, and from here Mahadi's trying to earn their trust. So I talked to Tignum, who's an old player who had to leave temporarily due to personal reasons, and have finally been able to come back. He was an awesome dude. I'm really appreciative that he was able to come back. I made it open for him so he could, just in case. I had him secretly jump into the voice comms on Discord, and Mahadi, as a sign of good gesture, brings him to damnation with his friends. So from here, Mahadi runs up the steps and tells them the good news that he brought Tignum here. Now, this was not only a way to surprise the players at the end of the session, but a way to get him there without any real difficulty so he could play in the next session, so we can kind of put everybody together again. He connected with his phone, so there was a bit of static, but the players are completely surprised. They did not expect this to happen. We finished the session, and we solved all the issues getting Tignum here there. It was awesome. It worked out really well, and the players really enjoyed the session itself. If you want to check out the entire session, check it out on YouTube and tell me if I missed anything. Join us live on Twitch on Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The players' next session will be heading to the Wandering Emporium, which should be a lot of fun and has a lot of interesting challenges for the players to overcome. Thanks for coming by, and this was Behind the DM Screen. So long.